Good morning, everyone. Thank you for being here. We're happy to be here together. And while this centers around a lawsuit, it really is not. It's not about winning or losing. This is about improving education for our students in the state of Rhode Island. In fact, and this is a side story, but I know Michael Revell since my time in New York and worked with him during our time to make sure that New York really did a lot of this work. So before I took this job, we had a conversation about how important this was for us to be able to move forward as a state. So I am grateful to him, as well as Jennifer Wood, who is here with us from the Rhode Island Center for Justice, who has worked tirelessly to move civics education forward. I'd also like to thank Steve Robinson and Sam Zurier for pushing the agenda on this very important issue for us. But most importantly, I want to thank the students who are here with us this morning. It takes a lot of courage as a young person to stand up and advocate for yourself and your peers. So thank you. Thank you. Because of their tenacity and their bravery, we now have an agreement that will strengthen civics education across the state of Rhode Island. We're happy to announce the upcoming establishment of the Rhode Island Civics Readiness Task Force to consider specific measures to improve the quality of civics education in Rhode Island. When civics education is taught effectively, students are prepared with the knowledge and skills necessary to become informed, engaged citizens. We want this for all our students in Rhode Island. We support the constitutional amendment for the right to education. This task force will be created no later than September 1st of this school year, and it will include maximum of 15 members from a broad array of stakeholders, including educators, parents, community members, students, and advocacy organizations. We're also happy to share that we will establish a diploma seal of civic readiness that will be awarded to all graduating seniors who have completed a capstone project, including both research and active community involvement, and have achieved high degrees of civic proficiency. We will also establish a civics awards program that schools can use to recognize middle school students who have demonstrated outstanding progress in civics readiness. As you see, we've made a big commitment. The task force will advise Ride On the advisability of adding a half-credit course in civics in 8th grade and high school, which will focus upon media literacy so students can learn to effectively utilize the internet and social media. Methods and resources to support students and how we have respectful conversations on controversial issues with individuals having different views of their own to be shared with LEAs and ways to include hands-on instruction on voter registration that will also be provided to LEAs, meaning districts. Implementation of diploma seal of civics readiness, the development of special definition of civics readiness, and more. Recommendations will be due by March 31st, 2023. And like I said, these developments will support ongoing efforts around civics. As you know, I was happy to stand with the governor as we signed the civics literacy bill last September. I'm also happy to share social studies standards are being finalized. This has been a focus of the department. Civics and government is one of the 4 disciplines around the standards that are being organized. The others being history, geography, and economics. Those are going to be part of our state standards. The standards factor in feedback from more than 900 survey respondents. Community engagement is critical to RIDE, and we look forward to more of this as the years to come. Thank you again for our partnership in education, for being here with us today. Together, we're going to do great things in civics education in our state. Now, I'd like to bring up Michael Revell, who has spearheaded this, not just in Rhode Island, but in New York. Thank you, Michael.
Okay, thank you so much, Commissioner, for those really inspiring words. Let me begin by saying that when we first brought this lawsuit, which was 3.5 years ago, seems like an eternity, our main aim was to establish a right to an education sufficient to prepare all our students to be capable citizens in our democracy. We have not established this as a constitutional right at this point, but we have established a context and a process that I think will strengthen civic education in Rhode Island so that the ultimate aim that this was all about, which is preparing all our students to be capable citizens for our democratic society, is going to be a reality, at least in Rhode Island, not necessarily in the rest of the country at this point. But, you know, looking back, I do believe this lawsuit was really important. What we've been able to accomplish, and the we, of course, includes my really distinguished co-counsel, who were an incredible team at every stage. And as the Commissioner mentioned, that includes Jen Wood, it includes Sam Zurier, Steve Robinson, and the 14 students who were willing to put their names and their commitments forward. And the advocacy groups, the other youth groups around the state who have supported this from the beginning. When I say we've established a context for this happening, I want to point out the incredible decision that Judge William Smith, the district court judge who initially heard this case, had established. If some of you have read that decision, it is powerful. Judge Smith clearly stated American democracy is in peril. This is quite a statement for a federal judge. And he went on to say that civic education is our best means of dealing with this crisis and in maintaining the survival of our democracy. He went on for 50 pages, and he almost apologized to the students at the end after thanking them that he didn't think he could interpret the existing federal law to give us the right that we were looking for. But he gave us something really important, which is this inspiring, powerful decision, which has resonated around the state, has resonated around the country. And that, I think, is going to continue to be a motivator, an inspiration, and a resource in going forward, not only in Rhode Island, but in other parts of the country. The second thing that this lawsuit has accomplished, I think, is inspiring and mobilizing our plaintiffs and so many other young people and committed groups and educators around the state. As the Commissioner mentioned, this case has gotten substantial publicity. We're glad that we're getting more publicity today because the point is not so much the lawsuit, the point is the issue. And that's what we want to get out there. And I will say, I remember the first time we were in Judge Smith's courtroom, we had about 50 students who attended that hearing. It went on for an hour and a half. Not one of them walked out. Every one of them paid deep attention to it. And the judge said, the first thing he said when he came in the courtroom, he looked around, he saw all these students, and he said, he welcomed the students and he said, I want to guarantee all of you, you are going to get an important lesson in civics today. And they did on that day in the courtroom, and they have for the last 3 years going forward on this. So I think in addition to this context, with the great assistance of the Commissioner, of others in the Rhode Island Department of Education, and I also want to acknowledge the great work of Anthony Catone, who was our adversary as the counsel for the Rhode Island Department and the Commissioner. But Anthony was a pleasure to work with. He was always upfront. He was always honest with us. And we reached this stage of negotiating the decision. It was clear that he had the same intent that we and the Commissioner had, which was we had to get this done, and we had to get it done in a substantial way. So I think what's been accomplished throughout all of this is building this context, it's building a process, and you know, the most important part of a process going forward is trust, the relationships with the people on all sides. And that, I think, we have clearly established. As the commissioner mentioned, the week before she took over as commissioner in Rhode Island, she was finishing up in New York, where we had worked together to try to improve civic education in New York. And she said, Michael, I heard about this lawsuit that you've initiated in Rhode Island. You don't need a lawsuit. Let's sit down, we'll get it done. And I said to her at that time, not yet. The time is not right. We can't get it done now. But she was true to her word. I think we have gotten it done. At least we've gotten the process done. We're going to get this task force set up, and I am confident with the commitment, the dedication, the enthusiasm that we have from our student plaintiffs, other students, advocacy groups around the state, and the very meaningful, sincere commitment from the Commissioner and the Department of Education here. We will improve and strengthen civic education in Rhode Island, and we're all hoping this is going to be a model for the rest of the country, because as Judge Smith made clear, our democracy is in peril, and we're all looking for ways that we can do something. This is something we can do. We can prove our civic education. We can create students who can maintain and improve our democratic society. So, at this point, I'd like to call on my colleague. One of my personal pleasures, I must mention, in getting involved in this lawsuit was meeting Jen Wood, who I had not known before I came to Rhode Island, to see whether there would be sufficient community support among the legal community and the youth community here for this kind of lawsuit. And Jen was one of the first people who stepped forward and said, this is important, how can I help? And she's been the most phenomenal help ever since. So Jen Wood, the Executive Director of Center for Justice.
Thank you, Michael. Good morning, everyone. I was explaining to my family that this is the most important day in my week, month, maybe year, maybe a decade. Because today we pivot from the tool of social change that is litigation to actually making change. And that is the most important thing that's happening here today. I really want to start by thanking the commissioner, because it is true, there are rare moments in a legal career where something happens that really isn't very traditional, such as the person who you're suing calls from New York and says, hey, let's get this work done. And I knew at that moment that, first of all, the commissioner was very serious about coming to Rhode Island and making meaningful change, and also that she was going to embrace the changes that would become possible through this process. And this closes the circle this morning, because that is exactly what is happening. We did explain at the time that there were certain constraints that we weren't even technically allowed to speak with her directly, but because there are formalisms associated with litigation. And that's kind of a theme this morning, because actually we have the state government, we have the Rhode Island Department of Education and their legal counsel, we have the counsel team on the other side, but today I came to address and honor and welcome the community who will actually change civics education in Rhode Island. And as I mentioned, really, litigation is not an end in itself. It is a tool for change. And meaningful social change sometimes, not always, happens through litigation in a variety of ways. And not always through winning in a courthouse, but sometimes through galvanizing around an issue. And this morning, we have with us all of the elements that are going to actually transform equitable access to robust civics education in Rhode Island. And if we do it right here, this can spread to other places. This task force that the commissioner is establishing and empowering is a very important sea change in our environment in terms of elevating the importance of civics education to where we all, everyone in this room, I believe, already had it at that level of importance in our lives and in our minds, but that has not necessarily always been reflected in policy. and in implementation. Today we have the Rhode Island Association of Social Studies Educators in the room. We have the Rhode Island Civic Learning Coalition and Generation Citizen in the room. We have the League of Women Voters in the room. We have the Secretary of State's office staff who work on civics. We have former educators and leaders in this state. But most importantly, we have the young people and the activist organizations that stood up when Michael came to Rhode Island and said, history and civics has not been given the importance it is due in our public education system in decades. And we need to change that dynamic. And there are 14 families who are represented in this room today who said, in spite of the fact that many of these families come from an immigrant background, are not part of the power structure of this state, and said, I'm going to lend my name to a publicly filed document in federal court challenging the policy decisions that my government has made. This is a courageous act. For those of us that litigate cases and work in these hallways, not so much. But for private citizens, for young people, teenagers, and their parents, to stand up and say, yeah, you can put my name on that lawsuit, and I am going to represent for all other public school students in the state of Rhode Island and in the context of the case in the United States of America. That's real courage. And I know this because I sat with these young people and their families and asked them, are you okay? Will you feel safe doing this? And what are the possible outcomes and pathways that we may encounter over the next 4 years? Because that is also the big shock. The young people who started with us in this case, most of them have graduated from high school in the intervening years, and to a person, this case has changed their lives in one way or another. But it's not just the named plaintiffs who have carried this case on their shoulders, because all of those families were part of and connected to civic organizations, activist organizations, organizations working for better public education, more inclusive and more equitable. And so this case has been carried on the shoulders of Arise and Providence Student Union and PRISM and Youth in Action and Young Voices and Cycle and all of the advocacy and activism organizations. And PLEA is in the house today. Parents are a part of this equation, and we have parent plaintiffs and we have student plaintiffs. And it's this community that will, in the end, make this change real, which is why the task force is really the mechanism for change and transformation, because it brings explicitly plaintiffs in this case, but also more broadly, the young people and families that have supported this work, as well as the professionals who toil in the vineyard of civics education. Those are the folks that are really going to make this change. We're change agents, but we're not change makers. And so that's what I really want to emphasize today, how grateful I am, and that it has really been the honor of my career to represent the plaintiffs in this case and all of the organizations that have lifted them up on their shoulders throughout the last 4 years. You know, you only get a few of these in a career, and this is one of them. And so this is a really special day. I really want to thank everyone at RIDE who's going to now carry this work forward, and I want to honor everyone who has brought us to this point. And that's why the folks in the middle of this room today are the folks that we're really here about. We do have a number of the plaintiffs in the room, both parents and students, as well as the organizations that have uplifted this work. And so for any members of the media that would like to speak with any of the plaintiffs or their supporters, we would like to make that available to you. And I'm sure that the commissioner, co-counsel are happy to answer any questions that you may have. Linda.
This would be either for you or one of your co-counsel. Who broke the ice? Like, how what led to the conference?
Well, I think that Professor Revell referenced this. We were having a very respectful dialogue throughout the course of this last 4 years in this litigation, because the Rhode Island Department of Education doesn't oppose improved civic learning and more robust and equitable civic learning in this state. Really, we had a legal dispute about what is protected by the US Constitution. The goals of the litigation have been largely shared throughout. We had differing viewpoints on what the case law provides and what the US Supreme Court has said students have a right to. So while we were having that discussion, and by the way, a critically important legal debate and discussion to have and to continue into the future, there was never any belief on any of our part, I don't think, that the department and the commissioner wished to engage with the community to enhance and improve history and civic instruction. That has never been at issue in this case. Really, the question in the case had been how best to achieve that, and what does the US Constitution, as interpreted by the US Supreme Court, provide? So there's been common cause on the underlying goals, as I think everyone has already mentioned.
And just a quick follow-up, when you lost at the appellate level, did that change the discussion with Ryan and the commissioner?
Well, obviously, we intensified the conversation about how are we going to pivot to getting this done, people? Because we could have spent another whole round and gone to talk to the US Supreme Court about this issue, but at that point, it really seemed like, given all of the facts and circumstances, that because we knew there was a commonality of belief that work needed to be done here on the ground in Rhode Island, that we should really pivot to getting it done.
You think everybody was willing?
I think that's a fair description, yes.
And do any of the youth want to come up to the podium?
I think we can do that one-on-one.